Our next presentation is Mr. Garside with our 5-year forecast.
Madam President, members of the board, it's always my pleasure to present the 5-year forecast. As you know, I do this every year twice, once in October and once in May. This is the first forecast that includes fiscal year 17 all the way through fiscal year 2021. Those are the next 5 fiscal years that we're going to be looking at. The purpose of the forecast is it's a financial roadmap for the district. It allows us to set our guide straight where we want to go with our finances, and it allows us also to enter into contracts that may extend beyond this current fiscal year we're in. Without positive cash balances within the forecast, you can't extend contracts that go the length of the forecast. So it's also an important document that's used by the state of Ohio. They use this document to kind of check on districts to see how they're doing financially. If they are start getting in some financial trouble, they may be placed on a fiscal watch, caution, or emergency. Pleased to say before I even get started into this forecast that we're not going to be on any of those, so that's a good place where we are right now. The first thing I'd like to talk about overall is a few revenue items that I'd like to highlight. Real estate taxes represent roughly 40% of our overall revenue sources. There's a couple different categories I want to highlight, but the first thing I want to highlight, this kind of takes you back in time a little bit. You'll see here in that first column, that's tax year 2010. Taxes are always collected on an annual basis, so our fiscal year kind of straddles 2 tax years. So tax year 10 would be you tax people in one year and you collect it the next year, so taxes are always collected in arrears. That's why when you sell a house, you always owe a big tax bill at the end because you haven't paid your taxes for that year, even though you think you may have. But what happened in 2010? In 2011, there was a reappraisal, and that was the first reappraisal that came up after the financial market crash. You can see from tax year 10 to tax year 11, when property was reappraised, we dropped about $216 million in assessed value. That's a pretty substantial drop. It was about an 8% drop in our overall valuation. Now that doesn't exactly equate to total loss in tax dollars because as I've explained before, House Bill 920 was put into effect back in the 70s, and as values rise, millage rates go down, so you collect roughly the same. It has the same effect when it goes the other way. If property values decrease, the millage rate rises, so you collect roughly the same amount of money. The problem was that there are certain levies, every levy is looked at separately, so the one that we passed in 2009, the 7.4 mil levy, we were collecting the exact rate that it was passed at. So when the values go down, there's a loss in taxes from that. So we did sustain a little bit of loss in tax. But there's a few things that I want to point out. If you move all the way forward to this year right here, you can see in tax year 12, that red amount, that's our commercial and industrial tax base, jumped to $704 million. What was significant about those 2 years? The casino came online in 2013. So that was a $57 million assessed value for that project. So it was roughly $160 million total value of the casino. So we tax 35% of it. So that was a big jump for us right there. Also, you can see that these blue lines, those are our class 1, which is commercial or residential and agricultural. Those have steadily decreased. Over time, we've had, because of the financial market crash and some of the home prices have gone down since that time, you'll start seeing that start to rise again with all the new homes that have come online in Grove City. You'll start to see that come online, and the housing values are starting to go back up again. I wouldn't say that the values necessarily decreased because what I would say they were probably artificially too high during the financial push back in 2008 or so. So they were probably artificially too high. Now they're kind of brought back down into where they should be. Roughly 66% of our value comes from the blue lines, the residential and agricultural, and 30% comes from these red bars, which are commercial and industrial. The small green ones at the bottom, those are public utility personal property. That would be your power lines that you see, running throughout the district, gas lines that are in the district, any sort of where they have the big electric units that are transporting electricity, those are also taxed. And the good thing about that tax is that they are taxed at the full tax rate. Our full tax rate is roughly 61 mils. Our effective rate, because of House Bill 920 for Class 1, is about 38 mils. So there's a big difference in between those two numbers on what we actually tax, what we voted on, and what we actually collect. So those green amounts, although they're small, you can see there's been a nice growth from $83 million up to $111 million of value. We get the full tax on that. There's nothing that's ever reduced from that. So that's been very positive for us. One of the other things you can see in the red, we have a nice steady growth in our commercial and industrial tax base. I would attribute that to a couple different things. We have had a community in this area that has been aggressive with tax abatements, CRAs, which are community reinvestment areas, or TIFs, which is a tax increment financing. Those are a couple different vehicles where they can incentivize businesses to come. For instance, I remember back when I first got here in 1999, there was a lot of discussion about the Walmart Distribution Center that's out on Southwest Boulevard in Demarest. A lot of people were upset that they weren't paying taxes at the time. What I can tell you about that property is in 2006, it came out of the 15-year CRA that it was in, and now it pays the school district $600,000 annually in taxes. So that has been going on since 2006. That's 10 years of taxes at about $600,000 just for our portion. That's a pretty big facility out there. So although there were some taxes that were abated at the time, it has shown up later years that we are getting that money. I also want to talk about a couple different TIFs that have come up in the news a little bit here and there. We have two different types of TIFs. One type is a hold harmless or a non-school TIF, and how those work, we have a couple of those. If you think about the properties around the Pinnacle TIF, which is mostly residential, and the Rockford Home TIF, which is just south of there, those two TIFs, how a TIF generally works is taxes are paid just like they normally would be paid. So you pay the same tax rate as everybody else does in the area, but those taxes that you pay go into this separate fund that the county holds. That's the TIF fund that they have. And what happens with those funds is they go to the city of Grove City, because these two TIFs are in the city of Grove City, and the city has issued debt and built roads and built sewers and built a lot of infrastructure that those houses use. So what they use that money for is to build those roads and do those things. Now, our portion of that TIF comes straight to us. If you look at our tax settlement that we get from the county 2 times a year, you'll see where those dollars go straight to us. So the city doesn't take the taxes that would be paid to the school district into the TIF. Those tax dollars actually come right to us. So it's a non-school TIF. Those dollars come to us. The slight difference with the one out on Buckeye Parkway, the Buckeye Parkway Center TIF, where you have the Walmart, the Target, the Home Depot, Dick's, those types of commercial properties. What happens there is, because it's a little bit more speculative than homes at times, there's a little bit more incentive for them to do some more infrastructure, incentivize those businesses to come. So the tax dollars that they would normally pay, those businesses pay into the TIF, and the city uses that TIF money to pay for that infrastructure through the debt that they issue, and any residual difference between the debt payment that they make and the dollars that are in the TIF fund come to the school district. So we're not as guaranteed that we're going to get that money, but that project has been a big success. And as you know, usually sometime at the end of the school year, Ike or somebody from the city comes and gives us a check for $1.5 million every year. That's the residual difference between what goes into the TIF fund and the debt service payments that the city has to make. So overall, our commercial tax base, you can see, has grown while our residential has decreased a little bit, and it's really helped us shore up our property taxes. And as you can see in the forecast, when you look at the detail in the forecast, we've had a nice steady, not huge growth because of the effects of House Bill 920, but we have had some decent growth in our property taxes. Next, I just want to point out, I usually talk about this during this time too. This is a little hard to see, but in the dark gray, it has millage rates for all the 16 school districts in Franklin County. And it shows where we rank as far as our effective millage rate is in the county. This first box, there are different kinds of levies. We have general operating levies. We have a bond levy that pays for the buildings that we've been building, and we also have a permanent improvement levy that helps maintain our buildings, put new roofs on, put the asphalt driveways in, buy school books, buses, computers. It's specified for any permanent improvement types of dollars. So this first column includes any kind of levy that any school district may have. This column here is operating effective mills only. You can see Southwestern is at 12th in the effective operating mills at 38.68 mills. The top is Worthington City at 51.34. They're about 13 mills higher than we are. Same thing on this side. We're the 11th lowest as far as our effective mills for all of our levies. That's 46.8 mills, and the top is 59.93. That's New Albany Plain Local. Again, about a 13 mil difference. If you added that up, if we actually collected that extra 13 mils, just in our operating fund alone, that would be about $30 million more we would have annually. So I think we do give a good bang for our buck here in Southwestern if you really start looking at us what our millage rates are compared to others in the county. There are some other districts. You see Reynoldsburg, you'll see Canal Winchester a little bit lower, and Bexley that's up a little bit higher than us. They also have income tax, school income tax. So if you factored those income taxes in, Bexley's would be roughly 14 mils more. You'd have to add another 14 mils on theirs, so they would jump pretty high up on the list. Canal Winchester, about 6.4 mils, and Reynoldsburg, about 5.2 mils. So we probably even jumped down a little bit farther if you really factored those in. There are currently 5 districts on the ballot in November: Columbus, Hilliard, Westerville, Bexley, and Canal. So there are some other districts that's going to, if they pass, we'll change this graph a little bit more. But I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so 60% of our funds come from the state of Ohio. This includes our state foundation funds and also includes property tax allocation. Property tax allocation is mostly for residents. Homeowners receive a homesteader rollback reduction of 12.5% of their taxes. So what that means is your tax bill will be about 12.5% higher for a home that you live in. But because you live in that home and you live in this district and any school district in the state of Ohio or any entity in the state of Ohio, 12.5% of your taxes are paid on behalf of you by the state of Ohio. So we get dollars for that. But to put something into context, so 60% of our revenue comes from the state sources. What's dangerous, this is probably the most dangerous time to do a forecast, because throughout the forecast, fiscal year 2016-17, the current fiscal year we are in, is the last year of a biennial budget. We have 4 more years. That's 2 different budgets that are going to be in play over this forecast. So there's a lot of things that could happen. You might have one biennial budget, the next one that's coming up that'll start in July of 2017. That one could be, who knows? And then you have another one that's going to start in 2019, and who knows how that's going to be. They may change. We've had many, many changes in formulas. We've had many different approaches depending on who is elected governor and how that works for schools. So I'm just here to tell you that this is kind of a volatile time when you think long-term about our forecast, because there's a couple biennial budgets that we're going to have to think about as we move through this. You can see the last 2 fiscal years. This under the green is all actual. So we realized a net 4.7% increase in state funding. You'll notice a pretty substantial decrease in this property tax allocation line. They have been decreasing our tangible personal property tax reimbursement In its heyday back in 2010-11 fiscal year, we used to get about $12 million in that fund, in that line. We used to get about $12 million of tangible personal property tax replacement. That's going to go to, we're not getting any this year, so you'll see the final decrease of about $1.9 million in fiscal year 17. That remaining $10.1 million is our homestead and rollback that we'll always have. So you'll see that throughout the forecast that we're going to continue to get that. But one point I do want to make, anybody that has a levy on now, no homestead and rollback applies to that. So the homeowner has to pay the whole tax bill. So anything that was passed prior to, I believe, 2014 is good. They're not going to take back that homestead and rollback, but any levy that's passed after that date, there's no homestead or rollback that applies to it. So the taxpayer foots the whole bill for that. And from what I understand, the state thought that that was fair because the state didn't get a vote when other people were voting, and it was increasing their costs, and they didn't like that. So that's why it's done that way. We are currently, a couple things to point out about our funding that make me feel a little bit more on the positive side, although there's a lot of unknowns out there. Funding has always been based on student enrollment. We are a growing district. You'll see that we grew, today is our first year for October numbers. We are at 21,647 students. That's an increase of 401 students over last school year. We are already what's considered a cap district. How the funding formula works is they take your total number of students, they put it into a formula, they kick out a number, and they say that number's too big, we can't pay you for that much, so we're going to decrease it. So that means we're capped. Last year we were roughly $14 million into the cap, meaning the state really owed us $14 extra million, but because they didn't have enough money to do that, they cut our funding. That's true for about 200 districts in the state of Ohio, so that's not just unique to us. This year, with these new numbers and this increase of 400 students, I anticipate that we'll be about that same amount into the cap again. So because we have the students that would garner the amounts that we deserve, I believe that any formula you put us in the future, we'll probably be able to maximize the amount of money we're going to get from the state of Ohio. So from that perspective, barring them from cutting funding altogether for everybody, I think we should be in decent shape. And you can see on the forecast that what I've projected out into the future is just keeping our state funding pretty much steady, taking into account that tangible personal property tax replacement going away. And that's one thing that we really don't have to worry about anymore because it was kind of held over our head for a while. We had a $12 million revenue source that was there. We counted on it, and it's dwindled away over time. And fortunately, through sound fiscal management and things that you guys have done, we've been able to incorporate that into our budget. We kind of knew it was coming. We planned on it, and now that it's eliminated fully in this fiscal year, it's not causing us to make some rash financial decisions. So I think that's a testimony to how we've been doing business here. I just want to go over a few to switch to expenditures. I just want to go over a few things from a high level. Personnel services. We have agreements with 2 of the 3 employee groups at this time that last through June of 2019. So we're locked in with a couple of our groups. We're still in mediation with another one, but I do expect that do hope that we have a good settlement there too. Employees' retirement insurance benefits. One of the major expenses that we have in this line item is our employees' health, dental, and life insurance. There is something that's still out there in the Affordable Care Act called the Cadillac Tax. Originally, it was supposed to go into play in calendar year 2018. The government delayed that till 2020, so you'll see that reflected in the forecast. But that's somewhere between roughly about a $2 million hit. The Cadillac tax is calculated by, they set a baseline for what a premium they think should cost, and if your premium's above that, there's an excise tax on the difference. Ways to get that down, and we've been trying to do that, is some plan design change and some other things like that, try to get your premiums down through other mechanisms. So we've bought a little bit more time with that switch from 2018 to 2020, so it'll give us a little bit more time to work on that. Other expenditures, you'll see a decrease starting next fiscal year for the win-win agreement. As you know, a few months ago, We entered into another amendment for the win-win agreement with ourselves and the City of Columbus Schools. What that win-win agreement says now is that our boundaries will remain the same, and our payment that we were making to the city, Columbus City Schools, of $1.2 million will reduce by 20% over the next 5 years. So starting next fiscal year, we'll see about a $240,000 reduction, and each year we'll see another $240,000 reduction until it's totally eliminated in 2021. So that's a good thing. I just wanted to point out that there's an expenditure out there that we will not have to make anymore. When we did make that expenditure, we were protecting about $40 million of that commercial tax base that I showed you earlier. So it was kind of a big deal that we were protecting what we had there. Overall, the blue is our revenues, the red is our expenditures, and the green is our cash balance. I like to talk in terms of where we are as far as our cash balance in months of operating expenses. We have about 7 months operating expense in 2017, and that goes anywhere from 7 to about 4 months there, and this is about 3 months. So our goal is 3 to 6 months of operating cash on hand at all time. It's a prudent reserve. It's one that we can weather storms, things like the tangible personal property tax going away, things like Cadillac taxes that come into play that we don't get to vote on, things like biennial budgets that are coming up that we don't know exactly how those are going to fit in. So it's a prudent approach, a good strong approach for us to have a cash balance at somewhere between 3 and 6 months. As you may remember, we just went through this process with our credit rating with Standard & Poor's and Moody's. Both rating agencies upheld our AA rating, which is a very strong rating. AAA is the best you can get. We were rated AA. And one of the main factors of our strong rating had to do with our cash balance. And I think that's a really important and a really important point to drive home, that cash balance is a good, prudent thing to do and a good thing to keep track of.